Are we live? Mm-hmm. We are live. Guten Erev Shabbos. So I want to take the next couple of minutes to talk to you about the special message of this Shabbos in a way that's, in my humble opinion, extremely, extremely important for all of us at this juncture in history. I think that we find ourselves in a very strange time. And I think of the words of the Rashba, one of the great Sephardic sages of the Middle Ages, Rabbeinu Shlomo ben Avram ben Aderet, who coined the phrase, Ha'adam hu medini. A person is, by definition and nature, provincial. We are all influenced by our environment. There isn't a single one of us who isn't in some way impacted by, the kind of things that are being talked about in the media and the waves of culture change that are sweeping across the land in which we live. I think the latest phenomenon is Meghan and Prince Harry. Right, the House of Sussex is not in order. On a personal level, it rankles me that somebody abandons their family, that somebody washes their dirty laundry in public, that somebody attacks his grandmother, his father. I really can't see that fitting into the notion of kibud av va'em, respect for parents. It seems to me so profoundly disrespectful, and the accusations being hurled are so ominous, so treacherous, so hurtful. It's very much not in the spirit of Yiddishkeit. But that aside, I think that there's something that's going on, something afoot, that's dangerous for all of us, and especially at this time of the year. And I'm going to explain. So this is a Shabbos of fours. It's a Shabbos of fours because this Shabbos we have not one, not two, not three, but four special events really going on. There's four things that make the coming 25 hours special. First of all, it's Shabbos Mevorchim. Every Shabbos has the power to infuse blessing in the days of the week that follow. In the words of the Zohar, Shabbat minei mizbarchin kulhu yomin. Shabbos cannot be viewed, or Shabbat can't be seen simply as one of 7 days, but rather it's the oasis, it's the well or source of blessing that nourishes and hydrates, energizes the entire week. There's an adage that they say in the name of the Alter Rebbe's Hasidim. I heard this from my father-in-law. I was never able to actually see it printed anywhere, but it's sweet, and it says something like this. The Hasidim used to, on Shabbos, they would farbreng and sometimes say, as we say in Yiddish, a gezunte l'chaim, and Shabbos wasn't all peaceful. Shabbos was lively, if you will. So they used to say like this, Atzusterte Shabbos, a Shabbos that isn't that peaceful, a Shabbos that has angst and energy and activity going on, is a ruike voch, that results in a peaceful week. A ruike Shabbos, a Shabbos where everybody's just sleeping, a Shabbos everything is just complacent, everybody just exists, is atzusterte voch. Then it's a week in which there is a sense of turmoil and a lack of peace and a lack of serenity. And I think that the idea is that if Shabbos is a day that's filled with intensity and Shabbos is a day that's filled with energy, people have time to engage with family members, with friends, with community. There could be heated conversations and discussions. We don't all agree on everything. What else is new, as they say? This is true with regard to every human being on the face of earth. It's especially true when we talk about the Jewish people. We say the Jewish people are just like everybody else, only a little bit more so. So when it comes to the idea of different ideas and different opinions and different approaches, we the Jewish people reflect that in a very, very robust way. So a Shabbos like that gives you an anchoring for the week. It enables you to go through your week with a sense of meaning, mission, and purpose. But a Shabbos which is just about a bowl of chicken soup, it's just about having an extra snooze, and you aren't toiling or working and trying to, deal with the issues in life. I think a Shabbos like that is peaceful, but it does nothing to anchor you for the days of the week that follow. And so the winds of change and challenge that come at you during the course of the week are able to buffet you around because you aren't anchored. So Shabbos is the anchor. That's with regard to every single Shabbat Kodesh. Observing Shabbat properly does not change one day in your week. It's a life-changing reality. Observing Shabbat properly makes you a different kind of person. The person who observes Shabbat is different on every day of the week. This is especially true in Shabbat Mevarchim, because this Shabbat influences not 7 days, but an entire month. The whole month before us is going to be influenced by what happens over the next 26 hours. So it's an important Shabbat. This Shabbat is not only Mevarchim HaChodesh, it's also the Shabbat that's Erev Rosh Chodesh. In many Jewish communities, Erev Rosh Chodesh was regarded as Yom Kippur Katan. It's the end of a month. It's time to take a look at how the month has gone by, to make amends with Hashem, and to try to recommit to live a new month without repeating the same old mistakes. And there's a sense of atonement almost, and cleansing that comes at the end of a month. There are some communities where people would fast or add special penitential prayers on Erev Rosh Chodesh. Obviously, Erev Rosh Chodesh, this cycle around is on Shabbat, so none of that applies. But the positive energy certainly applies. So there's a certain very positive and powerful energy that's found in Erev Rosh Chodesh. Remember, it's the last day of Adar. Adar is a month with a very potent mazel, a very serious power that pulsates during the course of each day of Adar. And when it comes to Kedusha, to holiness, we don't kind of peak and then slowly wind down, but instead we go Mechayel El Choyel, from strength to strength. So tomorrow is going to be the strongest day of Adar. Strongest day of Adar, the conclusion of a month of Adar, in which we certainly, at least in York region, saw good things and good news happen. Our community was able to come together on Purim this year in a remarkable way. It was really anticipated, but certainly not predictable. And of course, in my family, Fagin and I had the schus, the merit of walking our son labeled down to the chuppah during the course of this month of Adar. It was a very special month of Adar, Baruch Hashem. And this is the conclusion of it, this Shabbos. So that makes this Shabbat Kodesh an unusual one. In addition, we complete the second book of the Torah, the book which the world calls Exodus, but we call Shmot. And the notion of Shmot is names, the names of the Jewish people. Every one of us has a name. And Hashem knows your name. He's got your number. Hashem thinks of you as an individual. It's not only about the Vayakhel, the community of Jewish people, it's also about the Pekudei. It's also about the individual counting. Each of us has a name. Each of us has a personality. Each of us has a special relationship with Hashem, and each of us has been given a special task in perfecting the world and bringing Mashiach. The entire Chumash embodies the notion of the birth of our nation, the ideal of Geula, of redemption, of us coming into our own and receiving the Torah, not only on a national or communal level, but also on a very personal level. And the Chumash, the book, which begins with the word Shmot, concludes with a parsha called Pekudei, counting, one by one. The Vayakhel, the congregation that we are privileged to build when we come together to build a house for Hashem, ultimately filters into our own individual personal lives, from Vayakhel to Pekudei. And when we finish all this, those who have the privilege of being in Shul tomorrow will together exclaim, Chazak, Chazak v'nit chazek. We strengthen ourselves. So we have a Shabbat which is Mevarchim. It has the power to bless a whole month. We have the end of a very special month, which is always unique. It is also, as we said, the Shabbat of Chazak, a Shabbat that has great strength. There are only 4 Shabbatot like this in the entire year, because of course the book of Devarim, where the entire Torah is not concluded on a Shabbat necessarily, but on Simchas Torah. So we only have 4 Shabbatot which are Chazak when we finish Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, and Bamidbar. This is the second of our Shabbatot called Chazak this year. And lastly, it is the conclusion of the 4th special reading, because we have 4 times before Pesach that an additional Torah is taken out and a special reading is performed for the benefit of those assembled and even for those who aren't. As the Gemara talks about the idea of Am Shebesadot, that when people come together in a congregational way, they enrich the members of the congregation who aren't present as well. even those who are, for whatever reason, fear or anxiety, aren't coming to shul, are also enriched by what goes on in shul. So that's 4 special things, all crammed into one Shabbos. It's definitely a unique, powerful, and a special Shabbat. I encourage everybody to try to observe it a little more carefully, with a little more energy, with a little more devotion, with a little more love, with a little more commitment, and hopefully it shall become the portal of brachas for all of us. Which brings me to the actual point I want to make. The 4 readings. 2 seem Purim-oriented, 2 seem Pesach-oriented. The first of the readings is called Shkolim, literally silver coins. It presages the mitzvah of collecting the half shekel. The half shekel was collected on an annual basis, and we began to do that on Rosh Chodesh Adar. So on the Shabbat before Rosh Chodesh Adar, we begin to read about the idea of Machatzit HaShekel. Now that's connected to Purim because Haman, who wanted to destroy the Jewish people, we need to mute. So Haman, who wants to destroy the Jewish people, comes to Achashverosh and he brings him lots of shekels. But in fact, the notion of all those shekels in the end is such that we have what you could best call a preemptive reality. And the preemptive reality was in that Hashem tells us that Haman has brought his shekels, but you must know that the shekels of Haman have already been preempted by the shekels of the Jewish people. In other words, the half shekels we were giving all along to create the possibility of korbanot, from there came the great blessing that shielded the Jewish people in their time of need. So Shkolim comes before Purim. Purim is the time we defeat Haman. Haman is the Agagite, direct descendant of Amalek. Once annually, we have a mitzvah to read about Amalek. When better than on the Shabbat, in which we focus on the victory of Am Yisrael over the nation of Amalek. So those are Purim-oriented. And the order is obvious. Shekels are given on the first day of Adar. Purim is celebrated on the 14th day of Adar. The shekels helped us reach the notion of Adar and the stamping out of Amalek. So Shkolim naturally goes to Zachar. Then if we move forward to the next 2 parshiot, they are specifically Passover or Pesach oriented. First, we had Parshat Para. Parshat Para, read last week, speaks of ritual purity. Hashem says to the Jewish people, it's time to get ready for Pesach. And to be ready for Pesach, to bring a Pesach offering, you need to be pure. This week, we read HaChodesh, the time that Hashem spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu in Mitzrayim, before we left, before we were born as a nation. He gave us our first mitzvah. That's the mitzvah of sanctifying time. That's the mitzvah of having our own Jewish calendar. The Talmud Yerushalmi asks the question, shouldn't HaChodesh go before Parah? Shouldn't we first talk about the notion of a new month that's coming, and then say, hey, a new month coming means the celebration of Pesach. Make sure you get pure. The Talmud Yerushalmi says, indeed, that would have been a logical thing to say, but purity should come first. That's a funny thing to say. Why should purity come first? Purity has its place. Purity is the way we prepare for Pesach. Wouldn't it make sense to first talk about the new month that's coming our way? Pesach is only celebrated on the 14th. Erev Pesach is the 14th, the 15th day of Nisan. The notion of the Para Aduma has got plenty of time to be taken care of. We could read about HaChodesh, and then from there go to Para. How do we understand the meaning of the words of the Jerusalem Talmud? In a word, the Rebbe explains it this way. Rosh Chodesh Nisan is not simply about the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, or a new moon that comes our way, a new calendar that's being ordained for us, or a way for us to sanctify time. Rather, Rosh Chodesh Nisan represents the possibility of geula, of redemption. In order for us, the Jewish people, to be freed from the shackles of Mitzrayim, both in the literal way that it was foisted upon us in antiquity, as well as in the proverbial sense, the limitations that we will deal with today, the things that inhibit us in our present day and age, in both circumstances, we first need to have the notion of mastery over time. Hashem says time doesn't control us, we sanctify time. We're given a mitzvah in which we can take control of our destinies. We can choose how we utilize our time. We can decide how we sanctify the gift of life and the time we have on earth. Without going into the details, it's beautifully developed in the first volume of Likutei Sichos. The Rebbe says that because Chodesh HaGeula, the month of redemption, is what Nisan's all about, the reading of Parshat HaChodesh represents redemption. It's only natural that before redemption, purity should be in place. We see that, as the Gemara tells us, quoting the prophet Ezekiel, in the end of Masechet Sota, V'zarakti aleichem mayim tahirim, I will, proverbially, sprinkle upon you waters of purity. And the Gemara concludes, out of that, we can be redeemed. All of this, of course, is impotential. On Rosh Chodesh Nisan, we were prepared. The potential for redemption had been given. Actual redemption, that only happened on Pesach. When we read Parshat Parah, we have the potential for purity. The first Parah Aduma was actually brought in the month of Nisan, on the second day. The Rebbe develops this idea of redemption, potentially speaking, theoretically speaking, as presaging actual redemption. The possibility of purity, presaging actual purity. And he says this: when Mashiach will come, his job is going to be to purify things. Mashiach will have quite a job on his hands. In the words of the Rambam, Yokuf. Yokuf means he's going to use the power of his spiritual charisma to coerce or even to influence, almost by force. Not the spirit of force, the force of spirit, but that force of spirit will necessarily kind of cajole or powerfully influence people to fall into step. Mashiach has lots to clean up. Our world is really quite a mess. Some might think, well, that's Mashiach's job then. We'll just wait for him to come. And when Mashiach comes, we'll be happy to watch him clean the mess up. But the notion of these four parshiot suggests otherwise. There's tahara bepoel, there's actual purity, which will come a moment before actual redemption. But then there is the possibility for redemption. And that means potential or metaphorical purity brought about today. This is why, to me it seems, this message is extremely pertinent and important. As I mentioned in the outset of this little presentation, we are living in a world that has really morally and spiritually gone awry. The mores or values, ethos or ethics of the past are being tossed out the window as quickly as possible. Cancel culture is literally stamping out everything that we thought to be good or right. Schools have become places where not education, but rather dogma are being forced upon students. If you don't accept this idea, if you don't kowtow to this notion, then you'll be labeled all kinds of things. A horrible individual. Really? This reminds me of the stories I heard from my grandfather, who grew up under the jackboot of the USSR, of the communist regime in Russia. People are terrified to think independently. They have to simply follow whatever has become, quote, politically correct. Unfortunately, many Jewish people are swept up in this craziness, this wave of displacement. So often I hear people talk about Yiddishkeit as it's colored by these odd or strange hues of modern cultural civilization. People will speak about Pesach and it sounds like they're reading from a local newspaper. They've kind of co-opted Passover to reflect a message of what's politically correct today. They speak about a whole range of things, always sprinkling this deceptive cover of Yiddishkeit over it. But it's almost like first shooting the arrow and then drawing the target. You made up your mind. Your decision is complete. You know what you want. Now, how do I get the Torah to say the same thing? Or how can I force my ideas and ideals into the syntax of Torah to make myself feel better or to suggest that I'm actually a Torah Jew? It doesn't work. It's fraudulent and it's false and it's wrong. We need Tahara. We need purity, my friends. A whole lot of it. I want to read to you from the words that the Rambam wrote in the end of the 10th. Stop calling. The 10th book of Mishnah Torah is called Tahara. It deals with the notion of ritual purity and impurity. The last set of halachas is called mikvaot. A mikvah, of course, a ritualarium, is a pool of water that's constructed, built, or sometimes available in an organic fashion that enables the notion of ritual purity, of Tahara. The notion of ritual purity has nothing to do with rhyme or reason. It's not a reflection of grime, filth, or dirt. It's a spiritual concept. The Rambam finishes off the laws of mikvaot by talking to us about the notion of ritual purity and impurity in a metaphorical or parabolic sense. The Rambam says, what is ritual impurity in our personal lives? He says, I'll tell you what they are. Machshavot ha'oven v'deot ha'ra'ot. Thoughts of sedition and rebellion against Hashem, and bad ideas, rotten, corrupt ideas. What the Rambam calls bad is that which is anathema to the Torah. And the Rambam says that if a person is inundated with these ideas or adopts them, he needs to purify himself. How do you purify yourself? Says the Rambam that once a person decides that he or she wants to view life in a Torah way, vehevi nafshei b'mehadas, he brings his or her soul into the waters of knowledge. The waters of knowledge are, of course, as the Rebbe points out, water is a metaphor for knowledge, as we see in the words of Isaiah, with which the Rambam completes the entirety of Mishnah Torah. When Mashiach will come, Mala haaretz dea es Hashem, the world will be filled or saturated with a knowledge and awareness of the presence of the Creator, of the reality that we know to be true of Hashem's engagement with each and every one of us, and with existence in every single moment, in every iota. It will be kamayim liyom chasim. It'll be like water covers the ocean bed. He doesn't use the metaphor of light, he uses the metaphor of water. Rambam says, this exactly is the meaning of the verse in Ezekiel, which I just quoted before. V'zarakti aleichem mayim tahirim. I will sprinkle upon you, God says, waters of purity. The waters of purity, my Rambam maintained, is the teachings of Torah. The waters of Torah are the things that can purify our life. Parshat HaChodesh, to prepare ourselves for the potential of redemption, of seeing a new world, requires Tahara. What is Tahara? Tahara means Pesach is coming. We need to take the time to find out what Pesach is really all about. Don't listen to secular prophets who wish to twist and turn the words of the Haggadah into becoming a commentary of modern-day pop psychology. Don't pay attention to those who wished to literally pervert the Haggadah and the message of Pesach into some newfangled Western idea. We have been celebrating Pesach generation after generation, parents and their children, ever since we left Mitzrayim. People ask me about archaeology. I'm like, are you kidding? I sat with my parents and my grandparents. They sat with their parents and their grandparents, and the entire nation of Israel, regardless of where they lived, have done this year after year after year after year ever since we left Mitzrayim 3,332 years ago. We've never missed a Pesach. There's never been a time where Jewish people didn't sit down with their children and talk about Pesach. My dear friends, do you think that the message of Pesach has changed, chas v'sholom? Do you think that Pesach was celebrated 1,000 years ago differently than it was 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago? Yes, we don't have a Korban Pesach anymore. We don't have the same trappings. We're living in a different country, a different milieu, but the message of Pesach has always been a pure message. A message of Torah, a message of revelation, a message of that which comes from a higher place. Not something that's created by the mores of the particular society in which we live. Let's prepare for Pesach. The theme of Pesach is education. Educating our children. Educating ourselves. At the Pesach Seder, the child is supposed to ask questions, and you as a parent or grandparent are supposed to respond. What happens if you're sitting at the Seder alone? Sadly, last year so many people experienced this. What happens? The Shulchan Aruch says, ask yourself questions and respond. In other words, Pesach is always about education. The night of the Seder is always about learning and teaching and educating, sometimes even yourself. Educating yourself doesn't mean to intuit ideas or to borrow phraseology or even ideas from the world around us. We have been given a sacred and pure tradition. Let's remain loyal to it. It has kept us through thick and thin. By celebrating Pesach year after year, decade after decade, century after century, for more than 3 millennia, we, Am Yisrael, are now, hopefully, very close to the end of Galut and to the beginning of a blessed new era of Mashiach. Tahara, purity, the waters of Torah, Torah true ideas that wash over us, that cleanse us, that hydrate us, that transform us, are the call of the hour. I hope that over this Shabbos, we'll each take some time to start to read from the Haggadah, to read from its commentaries, and to begin to educate ourselves. And that during the course of the next 2+ weeks, we will spend time on a daily basis learning about Pesach. Because when we learn about Pesach, when we educate ourselves, when we purify ourselves, then we'll celebrate Pesach as it should be. And the preparation for celebrating Pesach and its actual observance is the most powerful thing any of us could do to accelerate the process of universal redemption and the coming of Mashiach. So the Eibishter helfen im Yetz Hashem, that we should merit to succeed in our endeavors, and that Hashem should indeed fulfill His promise of V'zorakti Aleichem, that Hashem should sprinkle upon us those waters of purity, that we should merit im Yetz Hashem to see in our day and in our time the world saturated in the knowledge of Hashem, Kamayim Layom Mechasim, a giant mikveh, a world of purity, prosperity, peace, and plenty, b'mheira o b'yameinu speedily, and in our days. Amen. Thanks for joining on Facebook, and don't go away on your Zoom. I'm coming right back. 1 second.